poll. For those of you who are not familiar with EdTrust, we are a data and research-driven organization committed to advancing policies and practices that build a more equitable system where every child has the opportunity to thrive. And most importantly, we do this work in partnership with community leaders, educators, students, and families, especially those from historically underserved communities, to really ensure that their perspectives and experiences are front and center when policy decisions are being made. And it is in that spirit of uplifting community voices that we collaborated with the MassINC Polling Group this winter to conduct another statewide parent poll of parents of children in grades K through 12, focusing on math education. Earlier last year, many of you joined us for a similar conversation about the literacy crisis in our state and what parents were saying about their children's reading skills. This time around, we wanted to focus on another equally important topic, and that is students' numeracy and math skills. And the current reality is stark. Math performance has declined sharply across the nation, including here in Massachusetts. In 2024, only 38% of Massachusetts 8th graders were meeting or exceeding expectations on statewide math assessments. And this is especially concerning as new data points to the critical link between math skills and long-term academic and economic success. So to better understand what is underlying these challenges, EdTrust and the MassINC Polling Group teamed up to gauge parent perspectives on this issue and to learn what resources and supports they see as vital to reversing this trend. And this yielded some really interesting results, which we are excited to share with you all today. This was the 11th in a series of polls we have done since the onset of the pandemic, thanks to the support of the Barr Foundation. I also want to acknowledge and express our gratitude to our partners in the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership, many of whom I see on the call here today, who really played a key role in shaping the content of this poll. A couple of quick logistical notes before we get started. If you have questions throughout the event, feel free to submit them via the Q&A function. We have carved out time to address audience questions at the end, so we will be sure to get to them. In addition, we will be recording this presentation and we'll post the webinar recording along with the slides on the EdTrust Mass and the MassINC Polling Group websites. Now, I'm sure you are all looking forward to diving in, but before we do, let me first share a quick overview of what you should expect from our time together today. Here is a quick glimpse of the agenda. We are excited to kick things off with remarks from Acting Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education, Russell Johnston, who will offer some reflections on the state of math education in Massachusetts and the current policy landscape. Next, we will dive into the poll findings with a presentation from Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC Polling Group. And then afterwards, we will shift our focus to our panel discussion on what comes next, where we will hear from a variety of stakeholders and education leaders about what we can be doing as policymakers, practitioners, and advocates to ensure all students have access to rigorous math opportunities that set them up for success. And then we will conclude with a presentation from Lindsey Henderson, Policy Director of Math at ExcelinEd, who will share some insights on promising practices and policies in other states that have worked to improve math outcomes for students. With that, it is now my distinct privilege to introduce our first guest speaker, Acting Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education, Russell Johnston. Commissioner Johnston became Acting Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education in 2024, following his tenure as Deputy Commissioner overseeing the state's accountability and assistance system to help schools and districts raise student achievement. He began his career as a special education teacher and administrator, leading the West Springfield Public Schools in Massachusetts from 2010 to 2014. And then since joining DESE in 2014, he has led support efforts for districts like Lawrence, Holyoke, Southbridge, spearheaded COVID-19 strategies to keep schools open, enhance student services for students with disabilities, and strengthen teaching and learning across Massachusetts. We are extremely grateful for his leadership and are excited to have him with us here today. Commissioner Johnston, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jenny. Privilege and just so pleased to be with you here today to talk about this important topic. And I think it's important that we ground ourselves in what do we know about how our students are doing relative to their math performance, and that it's a moment of reflection. It's a moment to continue to improve our practice, because what we see is that our results, particularly really all across the state, but our our statewide assessment results showed us in 2024 is the results are flat. We do have improvement among our third graders, which is promising to see and hopeful. And it just makes us want to double down even further on what we need to do to see better results. And a particular area where I want to point out that is a root cause, right? So what is leading to these flat results, in part, relates to the attendance challenges that our students are facing right now. Chronic absenteeism is still at about 20% of our students are chronically absent. And that's definitely affecting their math performance. So let me just explain that in grade 10, students who are not chronically absent are at 55% meeting or exceeding expectations in their math development, compared to only 22% of students who are chronically absent. Now, I'm not satisfied that only 55% of our 10th graders who are not chronically absent are meeting or exceeding expectations, but just seeing only 20, if you are chronically absent, only 22% of our students are meeting or exceeding those math expectations in 10th grade. And that just shows us the power of presence, the power of being in school. And it's also important then to disaggregate these data and look further. And it's important that I point out that the negative effects of school absences are even larger for lower performing, low income, and English learner students. So it's really an opportunity for us to understand where we are and then dig deeper. And I think as a point of hope, though, what is important to see as it relates to attendance and what can change this part of the dynamic for our students is really the power of family engagement. That the strength of a school's family engagement system, the structures they have in place to effectively engage families as decision makers, as partners in their children's education, is more predictive of absenteeism than rates of poverty. So it's in fact twice as predictive post-pandemic. So we know that as we really know and value our students and their families and engage them in the educational process, outcomes are, grow exponentially for our children. And so that really relates to what is embedded in our education vision for the state. We believe that all students and their families need to be known and valued. That's just the foundation. On top of that, we believe that learning needs to be real world, relevant, and interactive, and that with individualized supports, students can excel at grade level or beyond. And in math, that really relates to our work to strive for a deeper understanding of mathematical concepts for our students, procedural fluency, and regular application of learning to novel situations, because that's really practicing math in real life. And we want our students to be thinking as mathematicians all throughout their pre-K-12 educational experience. So there's some important steps that we've taken to make that happen, right? To lift that off the page and say, we need to get this, we need to get the right types of supports to our educators, because I so firmly believe in that power of the relationship between the teacher and the student. And so at DESE, we think about how can we strengthen that connection between teachers and students? And for me, it really fits into three categories. First, what are the resources that we're providing our educators? And then second, what are the types of opportunities we're providing for students in the way of interventions, in the way of expanded coursework? And then finally, what are the types of professional development that we can provide for both educators and administrators to really, again, tie back to that strengthening the connection between teacher and student in the classroom? So with curriculum materials, we have, first of all, just tried to vet what materials are most effective at educating our students in mathematics. It's a program that we have called Curate. And as a former superintendent, I'll tell you, your personal junk, your personal email, you probably get a fair amount of what we call junk mail, right? You get a lot of advertisements that come through. As a former superintendent, I will tell you every publishing company is inundating superintendents with the best new thing that they have to offer. And it's really hard to cut through the marketing noise, the advertising noise of what is actually effective for our students. So at DESE, what we've been trying to do for the past many years is to vet those curriculum materials and to make clear what is effective at teaching mathematics in the classroom. And that vetting process is led by educators. Those are our educators in the state who are helping us identify what is evidence-based and what can we bring to the classroom. So we have 30 reports of curriculum materials. So 30 different curriculum materials we have vetted to make clear about how much they will drive change in the classroom. And then we really have to focus on not only that, but how do we support the purchasing of those materials? So we've invested more than $24 million in purchasing curriculum materials. And then we have a convening power at the department. And so we bring together math education leaders from the state to provide them with networking opportunities for how they are both selecting, adopting, and implementing those great curriculum materials that we know will really help to move the needle for our students. And so that power of, describing what is most effective, funding what is most effective, and then bringing educators together to learn from each other, I think will really help to just further strengthen that critical role that teachers play in our students' math development. In addition to that, I mentioned the types of interventions then that we can help to fund. So since 2023, we've directly supported high dosage math tutoring for students in 4th and 8th grade in over 60 districts in the state. And so we've been pleased to be able to think about what's that extra intervention that many of our students need in order to catch up, because we aren't satisfied with these results and we want more for our students. In addition, when I think about offerings and interventions, it's really important that we look at, particularly at the high school level, what are the math courses we're making available and how do those math courses connect to students' college and career ambitions? And so we are partnering with many other states, 20 other states, in fact, to really think about how we can provide better guidance on what are the most effective math courses to offer in high school. How can we help make some shifts in the curriculum so that we are lining our students up for greater success in college and career? And then finally, behind all that is just the support that we need to provide in the way of professional development. And so we have our tiered math academy for educators and administrators to help them support, particularly a focus on early numeracy intervention programming. And I think that the results that we're going to see today are really going to point to that importance of early numeracy, and that early numeracy development is just critically important. And then we also work with math leaders, and I'm so pleased that we have a commitment from districts all across the state to identify a math leader, and our ability to bring those math leaders together, and not only just, obviously networking sounds good, positive, right? But what's it in service of? And what we are really focusing on with our math leaders are the assets and needs of our English learners in mathematics. And we know that if we can, extra attention, extra focus needs to occur for our English learners to really bridge together, again, what is a high quality instructional resource with really supporting language acquisition. And I'm pleased to see the support and the interest, the engagement, the excitement from educators across the state in all of these initiatives. And we know that we need to keep doing more. So I don't come to you today sharing what I think is a positive and supportive array of supports with the aim to pat ourselves on the back. Far from that. We continue to look at the data. We continue to push ourselves at DESE to say what more, what different, because I think, as I start with just the landscape of what is, I'm excited about the rest of this presentation being about what could be more. And that's that continuous improvement that we are committed to, and I'm so excited for you to learn more about today. Jenny, I really appreciate this time, and I'm glad to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for your powerful words and reflections. You said so many things that resonate. I especially appreciated the way you emphasized the critical link between school attendance and student performance. And also appreciate your comments about the importance of family engagement. We wholeheartedly agree with you on this front. Parents are critical stakeholders in this work, and we need to be doing more to engage them. I also appreciated your reflections on the importance of engaging educators in the vetting and review of high quality math curriculum and ensuring that educators' voices are front and center in that process. And we appreciate DESE's efforts on that front. And also ensuring that we're investing in support and professional development to ensure that educators have the tools to tackle some of these challenges. We all stand ready to advocate on these issues and more, and look forward to continuing to work with you and the administration to support your vision for the state. So on behalf of the EdTrust and MassINC Polling Group, thank you so much for joining us today and for your tremendous leadership on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Koczela, president of the MassINC Polling Group, who will share some of the key findings from our statewide survey. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. A special welcome to the elected officials in the audience, as well as members of the media, educators, and others. Really appreciate all of you taking your time to be here this morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can walk through some slides and see the results of the survey that we've conducted. So you should now all be seeing Mass Parental Insights on Numeracy, a PowerPoint presentation that will go over the highlights of the poll that we conducted late last year. Also just want to give a quick recognition to the Barr Foundation that has supported this work going all the way back to 2020 in its origin. So this survey was a survey of just over 1,500 Massachusetts parents and parents throughout the range of K to 12. And as with all of the surveys in this series, it included oversamples of Black parents, Latino parents, and Asian parents. And you'll see why that becomes important as we go through the slides, and that it lets us dig into a level of detail that wouldn't be possible otherwise. As we mentioned a few times, this goes all the way back to 2020, and there's just a few other details here about how the poll was conducted. The key part of this is that you should see this as representative of the entirety of K-12 parents in Massachusetts. That's how the data was collected, and that's how the data was weighted. I'm going to skip over the key findings. These and all slides will be posted on our website at massincpolling.com, and I think they actually already are posted there, so you can pop over there and have a look. We'll also be posting the recording of this event if you want to go back and see some of these slides at a more leisurely pace. So the first topic that we're going to dig into is parental perceptions of math progress and their perception of their child's interest in math. And the first data slide is here. So what this one looks at, just a quick flag, all the questions are shown right here at the bottom of the slide on each slide. This question was, how effective do you think your child's school has been so far at teaching your child math? And you can see that overall 45% said that they thought their child's school had been very effective. Another 42% said that they thought their child's school had been somewhat effective. We see in looking at the data that there is some distance between very effective and somewhat effective, and what parents mean when they say those two things does vary somewhat. But overall, you can see not too many people down here in the not too and not at all effective range. This next question is about how you think your own child is doing at math right now. With the top numbers here in the bar chart on the right, reflecting the views of all parents put together, with 54% saying that they think that their child is doing well. That's that kind of light pink bar there. 36% saying doing okay, and then 8% not doing well. But then when you look at it broken down a bit by demographics and kind of dig into the crosstabs a little bit, what you see is a trend and a dynamic which shows up on a range of different kinds of questions in the survey, which is that parents that live in households with higher income, so 100,000 plus in the case of this graph, and parents with more education perceive their child as doing better in math compared to parents who, for example, live in households with an income under 50,000 or whose own personal level of education is high school or less, are much less likely to think that their child is doing well in math at this point. And as I mentioned, this relationship between education and income and perception of math performance extends throughout the results of this survey. This question is about your level of concern with your child's math progress, and you can see that overall 13% say that they're very concerned about their child's math progress. Another 22% say that they're somewhat concerned. So overall, about 1 in 3 say that they're either very or somewhat concerned about their child's math progress, with somewhat less variation by race or child age, though there is some there that you can see. But then if you look down at the bottom, you see parents who say that their child has dyslexia, or parents of multilingual learners are much more likely to say that they're either very or somewhat concerned about their child's math progress this year. When you basically introduce the statistics about how Massachusetts children overall are doing in math, then you see a much higher level of concern for parents as to how children are doing statewide than they tend to express for their own children. So you can see that the text of the question is shown here at the bottom and kind of how this was framed. And then you can see that the difference where the question we just looked at on the last slide is represented in the lighter blue bar, where that's the percent who are concerned about their own child's progress or not concerned about their own child's progress. But then you can see that there's a much higher level of concern for how students are doing statewide once you introduce, the actual statistics. This poll is also paired with a couple of focus groups, and you'll see some quotes from the focus groups kind of as we go through. You can see one right here that reflects one parent's reaction to these statistics, which is just that something major is not working right if half the children in the state are not meeting expectations. All right, so the next question is parents' perceptions of how interested their child is in learning math. And you can see that on this one, we had about 40% say that they think their child is very interested in learning math. And then once again, a familiar dynamic that we saw a few slides ago, where parents in higher income households and parents with more education themselves are more likely to perceive their child as interested in math. So this is just one to kind of keep in your head as we move through the results, because it does just show up over and over again as far as how these results overall are shaped. And I should also note, we see Black parents and Asian parents also somewhat more likely to say that their children are interested in math. So another dynamic that we saw reflected in the survey results is that there's variations in how parents view some of these issues based on the grade that their child is in. So this one is the same question we just looked at, basically how interested you think your child is in learning math. And you can see that just looking at the very interested numbers, which is again kind of this salmon color here, it goes from 47% in grades K to 2 down to 34% when you're talking about juniors and seniors in high school. And when you're adding your very and somewhats together, you also see that kind of declines somewhat as grade levels increase. One other thing that changes is in terms of parents' interactions with their children in math as children get older, is that parents feel less able to help their children with their math homework. Where when you're talking about the youngest kids, so K to 2, you've got 58% who say that they're, quote, very confident that they can help with math homework. And then this tapers off and tapers off and tapers off until it's about a quarter when you get up to grades 11 and 12. This is also something we heard about a lot in the focus groups. And it seems to have both to do with just the technical difficulty of the content itself, as well as parents' views that approaches are different now, and the ways that homework needs to be done and the ways that math problems need to be solved and the kind of work that needs to be shown are different now than what they're familiar with. So here's a quote. Here's a quote on that. I was able to help her until about 10th grade, but then after that, I just couldn't remember how to do some stuff. But YouTube is probably our biggest resource helper with math. And as a parent of an 8th grader myself, I can certainly vouch for that. So this next section is about understanding performance, available resources, and supports. Whoops, sorry about that. And the first question on that we're going to touch on is just how parents are actually understanding where their child is in math and what information sources they're using. So this was one where you could, select multiple sources, obviously, because these add up to much more than 100. But you can see that the most commonly used source is just grades and report cards. And then the next few are conversations with my child, information from my child's teacher, and parent-teacher conferences. So you can see that the stuff basically that's coming directly from the classroom and directly from the teacher and so forth, and from the child are much more commonly used than our MCAS and math screeners. So this next question then is basically how well grades, the grades that we just talked about in the last slide, are reflecting actual math skills and understanding. And you can see that overall, most parents think either completely or mostly, with the most common answer actually being mostly. And then among the parents who said just a little or not at all, that's your 23% right here, they were fairly evenly divided between the number who said that the grades were higher than where their skills or understanding were, or that the grades were lower than where their skills and understanding were. And you see that reflected in this quote here from another focus group participant, where they felt that the grades were somewhat at odds with where they wanted their child to be, and so forth. So for just to read the highlighted part, he scored a 64, but I think my frustration comes from basically the fact that his teachers said that he's a grade level, that's great, and the parent was less sure that a 64 was great, and that's what that quote reflected. Looking at some of the specifics and where parents think that their child is most challenged, we asked about what, if anything, your child is struggling with the most in math. And then we broke it down by just overall, all parents here, and then looked at parents who are concerned about their child's progress. And you can see that among parents who are concerned, the two most common things that they say their child is struggling with are problem solving. That's 46% of those parents identified problem solving, and 44% said understanding concepts, basically making sense of the main ideas. We also asked about whether you sought extra supports, and if so, what kinds of extra supports, and found overall 1 in 3 parents said that they did seek outside help for their child in math this particular year. You can see that there are both demographic differences and also differences by what the student is experiencing in terms of who said that they're seeking outside help. So parents in higher income households are more likely to say so. You also had Asian parents and Black parents more likely to say so, and parents who said that the child has dyscalculia or dyslexia, multi-language learners, and parents with IEPs, all more likely to say that they sought outside help this year. So what exactly were they looking for? That's what this next question looks at. And this is broken down among parents who said that they did seek outside help. What kinds of things were they looking for? And a tutor was the most common one with 45%. Math programs or classes outside of school and online tutorials were the next most common. And you can see that there are some differences in terms of basically who was looking for what, with white parents and Black parents more likely to say a tutor, and Asian parents and Latino parents relatively less likely to say so. Asian parents more likely to say math programs or classes outside of school than were other parents as well. So that was another interesting difference. Then an illustrative quote from the focus groups on this topic. This parent was basically said that there was a teacher that would stay after school, but that even so they ended up going online and getting a tutor, and just kind of described the rest of what the school year was like for their child. So again, all these slides will be on online, so I don't want to pause too much on these at this point. The 3 questions shown on this slide were about how good of a job the school does at informing parents on various topics, both the math curriculum, that's what the sort of darkish blue over here is, teaching strategies used in class, and tips for supporting progress at home. And we had most parents either strongly or somewhat agreeing that their schools did a good job at communicating on all 3 of these issues, and not a huge difference on any of them. So, roughly 75% or so, or in that range for each one, or 2/3 to 3/4 thought that their child's school was doing a good job at communicating on these topics. So the last few slides then, and the last few questions had to do with both the coursework students are offered and take in middle school and high school, and what parents perceive for what might come after high school. So this first question was basically whether or not your child's school has discussed what math courses they should take in high school. And this one was limited just to middle school parents. So of course, you can't break this down too finely just because it was already only asked of parents of 6th to 8th graders. And we saw 31% said, yes, that discussion has happened. 63% say, no, it has not happened at this point. Looking specifically at algebra, this question was basically what what grade your child took algebra, if they've taken it already. And here you see that there's a difference with white parents, and parents basically over 50 in households over 50,000 were more likely to say that they took algebra earlier than were parents of color or parents in households under $50,000. But overall, 40% said 8th grade or earlier, and this one too was asked only of high school parents. This question was also only asked of high school parents, and it was about course offerings. So whether or not honors or advanced placement courses were offered. And you can see that overall 78% say yes, they were. And you have Asian parents, white parents, the most likely to say that they were, with Black parents and very particularly Latino parents, much less likely to say that honors or AP classes were offered in their child's high school. You also had parents with higher levels of education themselves, and also upper income parents more likely to say that these kinds of classes were offered. One other note on these is we also saw more parents say, I don't know if those classes are offered, where you see the overall number saying yes, lower. So for example, parents with high school or less themselves are more likely to not be sure whether or not the classes were offered. More say no, and also more are not sure whether the classes are offered. So this one then looks at what parents think that their child is most likely to do right after high school. And there's a lot of numbers on it, but I'll kind of zero you in on the ones that I think are the most powerful here. And you can see overall, just about half, so 52% say that their child's most likely to start a bachelor's degree program, with about the same number saying, identifying the next 3 is the most likely thing to happen. But then if you look at some of the differences, both by race and then particularly by education and income, you see very large differences, with white parents and Asian parents more likely to say they think their child is going to begin a bachelor's degree program. And then looking at education, there are huge gaps between parents who themselves went to college, so your college degree holders, your advanced degree holders, and parents who did not either complete a degree or even start college, in terms of whether they think that their child is going to begin a bachelor's degree. So very significant gaps that basically reflect the parent's own experience. We also see that show up in income level, with higher income parents much more likely to think that their child is likely to begin a bachelor's degree themselves. We also then looked at interest in STEM careers, and on STEM careers, there were similar, though not quite as big differences, with parents in upper income households and parents with advanced degrees themselves. And Asian parents the most likely to think that their children would enter STEM careers. And also parents of boys were somewhat more likely than parents of girls to think that their child would enter a STEM career. So then just a couple more focus group illustrative quotes from the focus groups. Whoa, I'm sorry, there's a smoke detector going off in here. So this is the last slide anyway, so I'm going to pass it over to somebody else.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. I hope you can get out of the building. And again, as Steve mentioned, the slides will be available on our websites. So if you want to take a look at those quotes, feel free to check out our websites. And indeed, the data offers a lot to unpack. And this is a perfect segue to discuss what this means for our students and families, and asking ourselves the question, where do we go from here? And how do we ensure that every student gains the fundamental math skills they need? And so I'd like to now introduce my colleague at EdTrust in Massachusetts, Shanti Lopes, who's the Assistant Director for Engagement and Communications. Shanti has been leading our polling work for many years now, and we are Very grateful for her leadership and willingness to lead our panel discussion to dig deeper into the poll results and address what comes next. So Shanti, I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Jenny, for the warm welcome. Now it is my pleasure to ask our panelists to please come onto the screen so we can begin our conversation. We are really delighted to have you all here today to not only reflect on the poll results, but also to share a little bit of your insights as well, as you all have been doing this work for many years. So I will give you all an opportunity to introduce yourself. I'm going to start with Dr. Strike, then Kevin and Andrea. Please feel free to share your name, role, and anything else you feel will be useful for the audience today to know.
Hi, my name is Steve Koczela. I'm currently the superintendent of schools in Salem, Massachusetts. This is my 5th year. Previously, I worked in Holyoke as the superintendent of schools. And way back, I was a 5th grade teacher who loved teaching math.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Kevin Cormier. I'm a former 7th and 8th grade math teacher for 15 years, and I was a curriculum director for 3 years. I now serve as the director of data and accountability for the North Middlesex Regional School District. I'm also a senior regional advisor for Teach Plus Massachusetts and a panelist / facilitator for the Curate program that Commissioner Johnston referred to earlier.
Wonderful. Glad to have a lot of math educators or former in the room. Andrea, now I'll kick it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Andrea Wolf. I am the president and CEO at MassINC Education and Research. We're a national organization focused on supporting states, districts, and schools on a variety of education equity topics. And we're based here in Massachusetts, and we do quite a bit of work around advanced placement in the STEM area. And so that is where entering this conversation from the math space, I'm excited to jump in.
Thank you. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you as well, and always appreciate your insights and perspectives. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question. This is sort of for all of you. This is more of a reflection question. Now that you've all had the opportunity to hear, and I know you've had the results as well, to have the insights into what parents are saying are the challenges for their own children, as well as their concerns when it comes to the statewide results and just the broader math challenges across the state. Just curious from the results and what we're hearing from parents, what are your initial thoughts on the data? Was there anything in particular that resonated with you or sort of sparked something in your mind? And again, this is for all of you, so anyone feel free to jump in.
I can jump in. I 2 things jumped out for me. The disparity between student performance and parent perception is pretty startling. I think as a profession, we reward students for hard work, good behavior, strong study habits, rather than accurately report to families how their child is doing in mathematics. And so when parents see the statewide results of math performance, they express concern, but they don't think that it's speaking about their child in particular. And so they're receiving conflicting messages from their child's school. And then I'm also particularly concerned about the inequities that present themselves throughout the data for students of color, especially and ML students and students with disabilities who express, their families express not having access to rigorous coursework, the resources to provide additional intervention, and then the access to information on how to best help their child. And that's a huge inequity for us to wrestle with as a state.
Thank you so much for sharing. Andrea, I see you off mute.
Yes, I would double click on everything that was just shared. I think those 2 areas popped up. My brain also went straight to those data points on 8th grade algebra and advanced math. We know that those 2 in particular are strong predictors of students' lifelong success, even beyond high school, right? Enrollment, persistence in college, even recent data on lifelong earnings, and how much math proficiency in the middle grades matters. And so just to kind of pull up, I was really sitting with the data points around the parents' perception of students taking 8th grade algebra. I think it was 43% of white families believe that their student took Algebra 1 in 8th grade, 30% Black and Latino. And so knowing there's so much research on how much that matters, both for future advancement in math proficiency beyond high school, I think that is a critical area for us as a state to really address.
Certainly. Kevin?
Now, I would say the only thing I would add, because those are both tremendous responses, is I think about the ability for parents to understand what doing well means, right? Because when I've spoken with parents and caregivers over the years, they're, between the negative societal conversation around math, and not really sure what doing well is until something like that 61% number is thrown at them, and they need to rethink that. So how do we do a better job messaging as to what that concept of doing well means to them?
That is a really good point. I think certainly for all of us, the disparities highlighted in the poll was definitely something that was a key takeaway. But I want to dig in a little bit more into what many of you alluded to, which is like that disconnect between what the numbers are telling us and sort of parents' perception, which is something that we've seen across not just this poll, across many polls. So just a reminder, as all of you have highlighted and we have highlighted today as well in the presentation, the poll findings really show that 1/3 of parents say they are concerned with their child's math progress this year, and that concern is a little bit higher among parents with younger students. And then that number jumps significantly to 74% of them saying that they are concerned once they get concrete numbers of overall math performance. So I know you guys sort of begun to touch on it, but just curious, what do you think accounts for some of that disconnect between parents' perception of the experiences and the broader education landscape? And then sort of, we know that that exists, but how do we rectify that? So how do we ensure that schools, community, and policymakers can really bridge that gap?
I'm happy to start. Superintendent Drake spoke a little bit about this on how, historically we relied on effort, participation, and not always a clear standards, proficiency, data-driven approach. And so I also, looking at the poll findings, noticed that most parents shared that they rely on report cards as one of the primary sources to know how students are doing. And a smaller percentage of parents said that they relied on data from math screeners or MCAS that are truly those standards aligned assessments, right? And so when I think about that, my brain goes to how can we support educators in really providing parents with that standards driven data that is coming from those assessments that are directly connected to student performance. And so that is one thought for me, right? Like there is no ill intent here. There is, what are the tools we are providing educators to have that data, and how we're supporting in the communication so that parents are really having conversations around those specific standards and performance, and truly understanding where students are at.
Yeah,
Thank you. I think it's a good point.
No, I would just echo that. I mean, I think we don't report out enough on how students are doing relative to standards. Many of our grading systems aren't standards based, especially as they get into the middle school and high school level. And it's more about, again, effort and participation, as Andrea pointed out. And that's concerning because parents don't always get the right messages. I also think there's something to be said about empowering young people to be able to explain to their parents also, and sitting down and having student-led discussions about where they are themselves. We want to empower students to be able to share. Our grading systems can be complicated. The language can be. We also have parents that don't necessarily speak English as their first language. You've got to set up the discussions and the conversations in a way that parents can understand. And sometimes students can be really powerful in messaging where they are. If we also do, we're trying to shift here in Salem to more of a student-led conference system. And a lot of that is how do we empower students to be able to explain to their families where they really are relative to standards. So that's a shift that I think we all can do better across the state.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because we definitely, I definitely heard a lot of that in the focus groups, as well as it was reinforced in the poll, where that was also a majority of parents that not only do they rely on teachers, but firsthand conversations with their child as well. So I think making sure that students are a part of the conversation is a critical link. Kevin, anything you would like to add?
I mean, again, both of those were quality responses, and I know there's a question later that I might be able to address it, so I'll hold off for now.
Excellent. Thank you all. So I'm going to shift to a specific question for Dr. Strike. So as superintendent of Salem Public Schools, you've been really at the forefront of addressing some of the challenges head on that we heard from today from parents. Could you share a little bit of insights from your experiences in tackling some of the math challenges within your district over the past years a little bit more broadly? And then just getting into if there's any specific strategies or initiatives or programs that you feel have been most effective in improving math outcomes, and were there any key lessons learned that you would like to share with other districts as they also grapple with similar challenges?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think this work is really hard, so I wouldn't say that we've got it figured out in any way. And I think we're on a learning journey like everybody else. Like everybody, like most districts, our math performance has dipped significantly since the pandemic, and we've seen a lot of students with a lot of unfinished learning and gaps especially in their mathematics. At the same time, we've also seen churn in educators. We've had a lot of change in our educators, particularly in areas of math and at the middle and the high school level. So, that has caused us to have to readjust the way we approach our coaching structures and expand our partnerships, because we do need more help and support for our staff to be able to deliver for our kids. But we are climbing back. We've seen a 7% increase in meets and exceeds over the last 3 years in grades 3 to 8 and 14% at the high school level. And I'll just submit what I think some of the strategies have been that have worked, because not everything has worked. But we've partnered with TNTP as a partner to help us really study and look at the disproportionality in outcomes. And we've learned that the problem is not just only about advanced coursework, but it's about a tier 1 problem that we have, where students just didn't have access to linguistically and culturally affirming instruction. We did not have the right high quality materials. Or we do have the right quality materials, but we're not using them in the right ways. So students didn't necessarily have access to at-bats with cognitively demanding tasks that push them to think, grapple, and engage with the mathematics. Just because you have the high quality materials doesn't mean that they're facilitated in a way to turn the learning over to students. And either whether that's independently with peers or facilitated by an educator. And so we're trying to shift from just focused on utilizing the materials for task completion, and now focus more on like how are students doing relative to the standards when they're presented with more grade level work. So I just will end with a couple just key recommendations. I would ensure that, as the commissioner talked about, that there's highly vetted problems-based curriculum in your district. I would encourage there to be a coaching model that supports often these newer educators to use the tools and materials to facilitate powerful thinking. That's particularly important for MLs who have not historically had regular and routine opportunities to engage with discourse around the mathematics. I think there has to be systems for educators to examine performance tasks and then assessments relative to standards, so you know how to reteach, regroup, adjust practices and interventions. I think there has to be communication frequently to stakeholders. And I mentioned it before, not just parents and teachers, but to students about how they are doing relative to the standards throughout the year. You can't just wait for the MCAS to come or, any other, post-mortem assessment. And then the final thing is, I think we have to support our school leaders and evaluators who are meant to give feedback around. They need to understand the mathematics as well, and to be able to give our newer teachers, better feedback around mathematics instruction.
Thank you, Dr. Strick. I know you mentioned sort of still being a work in progress, but I think you shared a lot of good information that I'm sure would be helpful, reinforcing the importance of curriculum, supporting teachers, tailored approach, and communications was, as I mentioned, could be in so many ways, whether it be ensuring that we're communicating with teachers, students, as well as our parents. So a lot of helpful information, I'm sure, for districts as they, again, try to challenge some of the challenges within their districts as well. I do want to make a note for our audience that we will have a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, anything that you're hearing, anything that you've heard throughout the conversation today, or in particular in this panel discussion, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. The next question is for you, Kevin. This question is a little bit more. We know that students will do better in the classroom if they're motivated, right? If they're engaged. Gonna touch a little bit on that. During your time as a math educator, as you mentioned at the beginning, just curious if there was any strategies or approaches that you found most effective in really helping to engage students that may be disengaged or struggle with math, and how can schools better foster a positive attitude towards math, especially for students who found it challenging. We definitely heard a lot about this in the focus groups where many parents talked a lot about math confidence and how that shows up in the classroom. So just curious from your perspective, again, how can we really foster and support students to make sure they're engaged?
Thank you. It's a great question. It's important. And I'm lucky because I loved teaching those kids, right? I didn't see it as a burden. I didn't you hear some of the conversations about quote unquote that class. I loved quote unquote that class. So it was easier for me to go into these trying to figure out, where can I meet my students where they are and how can I help them out? And I was also blessed to have a principal who let me experiment a lot. And so I think having supportive leadership to try these things, to try new things, because again, I'm in 7th and 8th grade. These kids have had 6 years of maybe not so positive math experiences that I'm trying to reverse. And so to have some leeway from school leadership is also something that's very, very important and helped me. But I really I tried a bunch of stuff and kind of like Dr. Drake said, it didn't all work, but it's learning through the process. But the two things that I think had the most positive effect was one was you had to be honest with them. You had to be authentic with them, right? There's a lot of standards, there's a lot of topics, there's a lot of chapters, there's a lot of stuff going on throughout a year. They're not all equally important to them. And if you go into it saying, all of this is great, all of this is important, they will see through that. And I'm talking from a middle school level. I mean, you can get away with that a little more at elementary probably, but middle school kids, they get it, right? And so it was important to be authentic when I got to, so for example, I loved teaching probability and I let the kids know I loved teaching probability and here's why I loved it and here's why it's effective and here's what you can do with it and here's why data is great. And when I got to, scientific notation, I wasn't as maybe exuberant as I could have been, but the kids knew that, this is something that we have to cover versus this is something we want to talk about. And so I think that, again, being authentic with them about that, it really helped because you started to notice that they would start to pick up on your vibes and say, okay, this is something that if Mr. Cormier is very excited about this, there must be something to this because he does this. And then I kind of went towards the end of my classroom experience of what I would have continued to do was where I still there is that sort of start with dessert in that traditionally classrooms are run with here you have to go through the skills practice and all of this. And then when you're done, you can try the fun extra credit thing. And I started to flip that model and say, let's start with the fun extra credit thing. Let's start with the problem solving. Let's start with the discussion. Let's start with those multiple points of entry for all of our students, get them involved early on, and then get them curious about, okay, now what do we need to know how to solve this? And you're starting to see some curricula, like illustrative and what have you, that are building this into their model. But 7, 8, 9 years ago, it was more kind of ad hoc in the classroom. And if you get 2 kids a week who just, kind of stop a little bit slowly on the way out of the room and say, hey, I really liked that, when they probably have never said that before, like that's the win that you take and that's what you're trying to build on.
Thank you. I think a really important reminder, and I think strategy, I think that probably applies not only for students, but for adults as well, that it is important to find that thing that sort of strikes your interest, and leading from there. I think often people might lead where this is what you need to know, but I'm sure that many will appreciate that reminder. And again, we've heard a lot about math confidence and sort of the motivation or how to get from parents. So appreciate the perspective from you as an educator. Andrea, I have a question for you. So the poll found that Latino parents and parents with lower levels of education and income are less likely to say that their child's school offers advanced courses. So I'm curious, given your experience at MassINC working to expand particularly advanced placement AP courses, how can schools better engage and inform parents so that they're aware of the benefits and also their availability?
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate this question. At MassINC for the last 17 plus years, we've been working across schools and districts here in the Commonwealth to increase access and success of Black, Latino students from low-income backgrounds to take advanced placement, because again, we know how much it matters for post-secondary outcomes. And as we think about the parent role in increasing access, that is a place where we often encourage our partners to implement a combination of strategies. So one is actually early and ongoing outreach, right? Not just reserving this in the high school, but building student and family awareness well before they're in 9th grade, 10th grade, when students can begin in the middle school grades, for example, to know I'm taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I'm gonna beat my drum here. Matters to be able to access that. That way, students and families kind of already know there's a roadmap. And if you were not a parent who went to college, didn't get to experience advanced coursework, you may not know to look for those things, right? I think the next piece is providing counselors, teachers, the tools to have very straightforward conversations with students and families about the benefits and the impact that participating in advanced coursework can have. And also being able to dismantle misconceptions around who advanced coursework is for, right? There can be this belief that it's for the elite or it's a private school thing, when in reality, we believe that every student can be successful in advanced coursework. And then when it comes to access, I think there's a lot of work that we can do to really remove barriers in enrollment processes to get to access these courses. Simplifying those processes, being very clear about them, removing the biases that educators might have, and using, again, standards-based data that tells us about the potential for students to succeed given the right supports. Data-driven reporting, I think, also really matters, right? How a school tracks overall enrollment, sets goals around creating greater equity in who is participating in advanced coursework, communicating that transparently as well.
Thank you. Certainly. I think definitely resonated, stuck out of what you said, which I think is very important, is the often and early, as well as a lot of was highlighted in the poll and as well by Dr. Strike, maybe leaning a little bit more into what parents said, which is, communications is important, maybe leaning into students more to help them really understand some of the resources and information that are out there, and not only to be able to interpret, but to really understand why they're so important. So appreciate your takeaway. Just like that, we're a little pressed on time, so I'm going to actually ask one more last question for the entire group. As you all heard from today, not only did parents report, disparities when it came to advanced coursework, we also heard many parents not having access to algebra by 8th grade, which is like a critical link to success. We heard a lot of other information in terms of who parents are relying on when it comes to getting sort of a scope and so much more. So just curious overall, given sort of what you know about the results, what you've heard today, when you're thinking about the future, maybe the next couple of years or so, what is one thing that you think is important for leaders and policymakers to really take from the discussion, or to really focus on, again, maybe in the short term? Andrea, I see you came off mute, so would love to kick it off to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm reflecting a lot on the enormous effort that across the state we've had with literacy in the last couple of years, right? We've launched the Literacy Lunch Initiative, investments, really created a awareness on the challenge. And so I would like to see something similar happening with math, right? Where there is investments, there's an awareness of those evidence-based practices. That's the good news, is there's quite a bit of research that tells us what we need to do to improve math proficiency. We shouldn't be just trying things out with students. And so to have a sort of statewide initiative that is focused on high quality instructional materials, addresses those supports that we need for educators to make sure that they feel prepared to deliver those evidence-based practices. Screeners, the use of data, going back to that, and making sure that we are implementing timely interventions. And so how can we have this organized movement and investment to bring this to life is something I would really like to be true in the next 5 years.
Certainly, I think both what we're hearing from parents and the results from various assessments underscore the need for us to continue to tackle literacy challenge, but also to shift some of our attention more to math.
Yeah. So I would just in response, I couldn't agree more. Two things I'd say. I'll if I could just say two, I would say one is I do think we have to not forget that what happens in elementary school is so important. And as from the moment that students get into our system, in our case, it's pre-K, 3 and 4 year olds around mathematics, and we've got to support our educators. Many of our educators say that they have a phobia of teaching math, elementary educators. And so how do we support them, demystify that, and send the message to kids and parents that, that you prepare for STEM and STEM careers as early as when students first come to school. And so what does the instruction need to look like early on in schools? And just like Andrea said, it's, there's been a lot of focus on early literacy. There should be also a huge focus on early numeracy as well. And the second thing I'd say is, I don't think the answer is just, I think we spend a lot of time focusing on what courses kids take, which is important, but it's also to make sure that kids have access to grade level work and higher, regardless of what classrooms they're in. And regardless of what their academic profile is, if they're an ML, they're a student with disabilities. I think too often we're dumbing down the experience. We're not giving access. We're assuming that the kids are so far behind, but it's not one or the other. It's both. We've got to scaffold and support, but they need to see what grade level work is, and they need to be supported to do that. And so I think there's a danger that happens a lot certainly with newcomers, with students with disabilities. They never actually get at bats with grade level work. And especially as they get older, and maybe the gaps, in some cases, the gaps are pronounced for them. They had interrupted schooling for whatever reason. We can't forget that every child deserves access to not only the advanced coursework what Andrea talks about, but also advanced and cognitively demanding tasks and work on a daily basis in classrooms.
Thank you, certainly. And I think Andrea talked about that before, not that these courses are for these students, but really opening that opportunity for all students is key. Kevin, I'll give you the last word. Is there anything that either you would like to build off of what was said today or anything you would like to add?
Yeah, actually, I think I'm going to combine those last two responses because my biggest concern is the possible inconsistency in competence determinations that are going to be established across the state, and what inequities are going to continue to grow based on that. And so it's to Dr. Zreich's comment about making sure that grade level work is available to all students. And then also to Andrea's comment about how it starts early, right? Because the competence determination is the end of multiple years of instruction and work, right? And so how are we making sure that we're setting all students up for success early, so when they get to whatever the individual districts are going to decide is quote unquote enough, they're ready to do that. And then hopefully that enough is consistent statewide in a way that it has the potential to not be right now.
Thank you so much for bringing up that point. I think what you all said nicely tied that standards are important and having consistency across our state as well. I appreciate you all for coming today and sharing your perspective. I will see you all in a little bit. I'm going to kick it over to Jenny, and we'll see you all back in a few minutes for the Q&A. Audience, a reminder, you can feel free to drop questions throughout the conversation.
Thanks, Shanti, and thank you all so much for your unique insights into this challenge and what we can be doing to improve opportunities and outcomes for students. Now we want to shift our focus a bit and ask ourselves what we can learn from other states. And take a deeper look at promising policies that are working in other parts of the country to improve math outcomes and opportunities, and some things that we can consider here in Massachusetts. And so I am really excited to introduce our next speaker, Lindsey Henderson, who's the Policy Director of Math at ExcelinEd, which is a nonprofit that conducts and leverages research to understand how policies can drive academic achievement, close equity gaps, improve college career readiness, and ensure real-world success. Today, she will share highlights from their recent research on math policies across the nation. And so I'm excited to dig in. Lindsey, over to you.
Thank you so much. I want to make sure that my screen is sharing okay. It looks like it is. I'm having issues and I apologize. Let me see if I can fix that really quickly. Perfect. So my name is Lindsey Henderson, and I am the Math Policy Director for ExcelinEd, and I am thrilled to be a part of this critical conversation. Everything that has been said so far up to this point has really resonated with me, and I always love the opportunity to talk about how important mathematics is. Shared a little bit about ExcelinEd. Thank you, Jenny, so much for giving such wonderful insight into our work. We are a national nonprofit, and we work to convene education thought leaders, conduct research, and do scans where we can highlight what is happening in other states in terms of promising practice that is evidence-based and research-based for improved student outcomes in mathematics. So as part of my work, I get to work strictly in the math sphere, and I really focus on that K-8 pipeline because, as somebody mentioned earlier, K-8 really builds the foundation for future mathematical success and for engaged citizenship post high school. And so what we did was really scraped all of the research and the evidence that is available and looked at what are promising practices that states can do, what are policy solutions at a state level that really move the needle for student outcomes in mathematics. And we like to call these 50 state scans, and we also include the District of Columbia in that, so it's 50+1. And we really the findings were fascinating to me. When what we did was we finalized the indicators that we thought made good policy, and then we took a close look at every state in the District of Columbia to see at what level their state had a policy that addressed the solution that we felt was evidence-based. And what was fascinating to me was that every state thinks that math is important for students, and every state is doing something to try to move the needle on math improvement for students. And the flip side of that is that every state has work to do and can really tighten up what they're doing from a policy level to ensure that students have access to rigor and access to mathematical opportunity. So I'm excited to share 4 findings. I first want to go over our fundamental principles that we have adopted at ExcelinEd based on evidence and research for what we think moves the needle in terms of math improvement. We have 6 of them. They include a lot of things that you've heard already before in this webinar. High quality instructional materials. We want students and teachers to have access to those so that they can get rich learning experiences, building mathematical knowledge and mathematical skills in their students. We want educator supports, that's rich teacher training and educator preparation programs that really equip teachers with the pedagogy and with the evidence-based ways of teaching and learning math that we want to have in kids' hands. We want the use of assessments to be part of the conversation, data-driven instructional decisions, and first alerts. We need to normalize interventions that all students need help at some point in their math career, and that doesn't make them any less of a math person. And our 4th fundamental principle is dedicated core instructional time. We want kids to be learning math every single school day of the school year, and we need that time to be consistent, and we need it to be, like I said, uninterrupted. The 5th is an underleveraged resource that I think every state has an opportunity to move the needle on, which is engaging our families and caregivers and our students in the conversation on what it takes to learn math and to continue to have that grit and perseverance that it takes in order to be a successful mathematician. And then our 6th fundamental principle is called automatic enrollment in advanced math. And this is our newest fundamental principle and gives access to students to algebra in middle school and then advanced coursework in high school for the students that are ready to engage in those opportunities. So now I'd like to share 4 highlights that we have from our 50-state scan and give you some ideas about what I always love to highlight high flyers, and I'm excited for you to make the connection between what's being done in other states and where you have the potential to move the needle in Massachusetts. So perhaps one of the most surprising findings in our 50-state scan had to do with our for instruction, that dedicated daily time for math instruction that we want students to have every single day. And when we took a look at our 50-state scan, I was rather surprised to see that only one state in the nation prioritizes a 60-minute block of time for students to learn mathematics every single day of the school year. And that state is Alabama, and that is with their Alabama Numeracy Act of 2022. I call this fundamental principle really a culture setting fundamental principle. You're prioritizing that mathematics instruction is important. You're dedicating a set amount of time for kids to learn mathematics every single day. And then to take it a little bit further, beyond just dedicating that amount of time, it's the use of that time that's super important. You want teachers to be trained and know how to use those high leverage evidence-based best practices that accelerate mathematics learning, that help kids reach grade level content, that provide just-in-time supports for interventions, that correct misconceptions when they come up, so that it's a very rich learning environment for kids to learn mathematics in. The second state I'd like to highlight is North Carolina, and I need to give a shout out to two other states on this as well, because this has to do with our automatic enrollment in advanced math. We took a look at North Carolina, Texas, and Washington State. All three of those states have an automatic enrollment in advanced math policy, and I chose to highlight North Carolina because their automatic enrollment policy has been in place the longest, since 2018. So what this policy does is it's starting in middle school. You don't want to start too early. So starting in middle school, you're taking the summative assessment. And in Massachusetts case, that would be the MCAS. You're taking students who score in the top quartile. So proficient and highly proficient students at the end of level test. And you are automatically enrolling them in an advanced math class for the following year, which puts them on track to take Algebra 1 in middle school, and then have opportunities to take multiple AP, IB, dual enrollment math classes in high school. This policy in North Carolina was a bipartisan effort. It received no resistance from anybody. It passed the legislature unanimously. And what it has shown since 2018 is that it is good for all students. It gives them opportunities and access to these advanced math courses. But it's particularly great for students of color, for low socioeconomic students, by automatically identifying and bypassing parent or teacher recommendations and just using data to enroll students and get them access to advanced math. It increases opportunity for all students to have access to Algebra 1 and those wonderful college credit-bearing opportunities in high school. The fourth state I'd like to highlight is Florida, and Florida does a wonderful job with their statute that I have linked on the screen to administer screeners every single school year, starting in kindergarten and going through 8th grade. Now, our universal screener policy, it's not the administration of the screener that's important. That's the first step. The important part of the screener is the data that the teachers and the data that the students and the data that the parents get back from the screener. For teachers, screener can provide insight into those funds of knowledge, those wonderful math, the math knowledge that kids bring with them to the classroom. And then it can also act as an alert. Where is a student going to struggle? Where is a gap? Where is somewhere that I need to provide a just-in-time support as a teacher? How can I personalize my lesson planning so that all students can have access to the grade level content and that I can correct misconceptions or keep students on track to be the best that they can mathematically? For parents, screeners provide very specific information about the math that a student is learning and how the student is performing. It's more specific than a letter grade. It is topics, and it shows how your student is performing. And with that information, Florida's statute requires that teachers are supposed to provide resources to students who have a red flag or are showing perhaps some unfinished learning. And with those resources, it really draws parents into the conversation to provide supports at home, normalizes the intervention process. Everybody needs help learning math somewhere along the way, and we've got to make it normal, and we've got to provide resources, and we've got to get kids on track so that everybody can achieve grade level excellence. And the last state I'd like to highlight is Maryland. And I should also put an asterisk here because I heard from Commissioner Johnston a lot about the high quality materials work that has been done in Massachusetts as well. I chose to spotlight Maryland because they have just developed a high quality instructional materials framework for mathematics. And what that was, it was a lot of the same things that Commissioner Johnston talked about. They brought together stakeholders from Maryland, teachers, teacher leaders, parents, higher education professionals, people who had knowledge of how you teach and learn mathematics through instructional materials. And they had them identify what are the important pieces of a high quality instructional material. What does it take for a textbook or for instructional materials to be considered high quality in the state of Maryland? They have this framework. It is very evidence-based. There's tons of research that supports the vectors that Maryland, this community of stakeholders came up with for the high quality instructional materials framework. And from this framework, Maryland is going to develop a rubric that is going to be used by teachers in the state of Maryland to evaluate instructional materials and provide information about, do they align to standards? Are they culturally affirming? Do they include the rich cognitive tasks as well as procedural fluency? The list will be provided statewide, and the next step would be for Maryland to incentivize the adoption of those high quality materials that meet the threshold for schools by providing either more per pupil funding for students or by making the materials free because they are a statewide adopted high quality instructional material. With that, I want to leave you with some resources. I realize you can't click on the screen, so I've included a QR code. If you scan that, it will take you to a copy of my slide deck. And we have a ton of resources on the ExcelinEd website. We have model policy that talks about all of our fundamental principles. And we also have a wonderful automatic enrollment in advanced math video that I think you would really enjoy. That was put out in partnership with EdTrust and the Collaborative for Student Success, and really highlights the wonderful movement that they've seen in North Carolina for that policy. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for your time, and I'll turn the time over to Jenny.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. Your presentation has given us a lot to reflect on and explore as we move forward, and I think really emphasizes the importance of looking to best practices in other states and leveraging data and research on what works as we look to tackle these challenges in Massachusetts. So with that, it's now time to turn over to our very last part of the agenda. I'm going to invite Shanti back on the stage to kick off the question and answer portion of today's event.
I want to echo the thanks, Lindsey, for joining us today to share some promising practice. And thank you, Jenny, for the transition. I'd like to invite all our panelists, Steve and Lindsey, back on the screen for the Q&A portion. I would also like to invite Dr. Kim Talbot, who is the Executive Director of Academics at Salem Public School. She will be joining us today as well for the portion of Q&A. So we have a few questions, but I want to start off with two that are sort of broad for anyone that wants to jump in. The first one is, how can schools and districts ensure that assessments such as iReady or MCAS are being used in a meaningful way to inform teaching? Again, broad, anyone can feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in first. So Florida's case with the screeners really highlights the importance of giving specific actionable feedback coupled with resources to parents. And when I talk about specific feedback, you're talking about how your student is performing relative to a specific math standard. Is your student having, and it's even more specific than like, is your student having struggles with fractions? It's like your student has trouble with understanding what a whole is in terms of fractions, or your student is having trouble adding fractions with like denominators, either the concept or the procedure. And then coupled with that, you're providing resources to the parent to help at home. And as the teacher, you're relying on your high quality instructional materials to have intervention resources that are really important for you to help get students up to speed on those concepts. Florida's done a wonderful job. They require teachers to reach out to parents and to engage them in the conversation and to provide free resources to the parents to help students with math concepts. That is all part of their policy that has to do with universal screeners.
Thank you. I think a lot of what you mentioned resonated with the rest of the speakers today. I saw a lot of head nodding, so curious if anyone else had anything that they would like to add or anything in general they would like to share.
Yeah, I would just say, though, I think it's important that there be standards-based assessments along the way. MCAS can be one form of that, but that only happens once a year and it doesn't give you immediate feedback. I do think it's important that districts have tools, whether they create it themselves or they leverage other resources to be able to communicate to all the stakeholders where a child is relative to standards. That's really important information. It's not about the punitive test and the accountability that comes with the test. It's about, we have a responsibility to teach young people mathematical standards that we've all agreed on are important for young people to have access to, important pathways beyond just their K-12 experience. So I think districts do need tools where they're regularly assessing and making decisions in the moment for what kids need around their mathematical understanding.
Just to add to that, I would also say that there's a role we can play in making sure teachers know how to use the screeners, right? I think this is going to some of the questions I see in the Q&A around educator preparedness. And we know, I'm thinking back to, my first year of teaching bilingual students, 5th grade math, right? Like I had to relearn some math concepts. And so I know that helping teachers understand, what is the data screener is telling me, what does it mean for what I need to do next and how I communicate with students, is on us, is on teacher prep programs, it's on districts, it's on the support system for educators.
Certainly, I want to give anyone else the opportunity to jump in. If not, I'll transition us to the next question. Going once, going twice. Okay, so the next question is also open floor. What does the data show in terms of the impact of teacher quality on student outcomes and parent perception of these teachers in conjunction with their perception on how their children are performing? Again, anyone feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in on the first part. In Salem, we paid very close attention to the outcomes of students, of new teachers. We wanted to make sure that any disadvantage a student might have by having a new teacher was mitigated through coaching and feedback and observation. So we use some of the reports that the state provides about the student experience, and we know it's really important for kids to have high quality instruction. And so we were able to pitch in Salem the use of our internal resources to really focus on the skills and knowledge that new teachers had and how they approached their students, particularly around math instruction, which, as Dr. Strike had pointed out, is not something that our elementary teachers necessarily were super confident in.
Thank you so much. Steve?
Yeah, in terms of perceptions, one thing we found consistently over the years, not just in this survey, but in many surveys, is that it tends to be that the closer to your own child you're talking about and the thing that whatever you're asking about, sort of the closer to your own experience, the higher the ratings and the higher the level of satisfaction tends to be. And it's at least somewhat and significantly independent of how good the thing actually is relative to other things that are further away. So think, for example, your own child's teacher, your own child's school, your own child's district, all of those things, opinions get progressively more skeptical than statewide schools, than schools across the country. Basically, the further out from your own experience you're going, the bigger the problems seem, the worse things seem, and so forth. And then very much vice versa, where the closer you are to your child's own experience, the higher the satisfaction level tends to be. So we don't have perfect data, and we can't link parent opinion with child actual achievement, for example, but just observing it over such a long period of time, I think we can say very confidently that it's at least very much independent to a large extent of how things actually are in that school and in that classroom.
Thank you for bringing that up, Steve, because it's certainly something that I've sort of stuck out for me as well while we've been doing the polling over the last couple of years when it comes to, again, I think it's a little bit more broader, not just necessarily about today's conversation. Anyone else would like to add to that? If not, I have a question that I would like to ask Lindsey. Okay, Lindsey, how did ExcelinEd identify practices to look at when serving for effective state practices? NAEP growth scores, state growth scores, or something else?
That's an excellent question. We actually we used two pieces of evidence, and I always like to show visual aids that, so we used a National Academies report called Adding It Up, how Helping Children Learn Mathematics. It was published in 2002. It's a seminal piece if you're a math educator. It's kind of like the Bible of math education. And then we used this final report of the National Mathematics Panel. I'm like 80 years old and printed it off. It's from 2008. Also convened by the Department of Education. It was a group of stakeholders that came together to talk about the different ways to influence math teaching and learning in the United States. So this is our evidence base for our fundamental principles of policy. And then when we looked at promising practices and evaluating those, we rely heavily on NAEP and looking at NAEP growth. But for other vectors, like the automatic enrollment in advanced math policy, we looked at students having access and different demographics of students having access to advanced math coursework, particularly Algebra 1 in middle school, and then those AP, IB, any college credit-bearing math coursework in high school. And we looked at the growth of the program over time. And if it was if parents were more interested in sending their student to a school that had an automatic enrollment policy versus if it was like an attractor for student population. So I would say it's varied. You can count on NAEP across the board, but there are also other pieces of information that we really look to identify promising practices, such like I described with the automatic enrollment.
Thank you for sharing, Lindsey. And I just wanted to share in the chat some of the audience appreciating your perspective as well as you walking them through sort of the process as well. I have a question that is also, this is our last question, unfortunately, that we'll be able to get to. All are welcome to jump in, although I think that it might maybe resonate a little bit more with some of our educators or former educators. The question is, in my experience of teaching math and science, one thing I found to be particularly problematic is the pace of learning. There is not enough time for students to process their learning. Is there any research on the pace of learning and processing math topics in order for students to remember what they have learned long after they have left the classroom? So really, really good question, also from a fellow educator. So just curious if anybody would like to jump in.
Yeah, I can just say quickly, I do think Lindsey mentioned this too. There's not enough time on learning for math. Generally speaking, in schools and classrooms, in order to do the kind of deep student thinking that we would want to see across schools and classrooms. That starts from the moment that they come to school in the younger grades as well. I also think, we have to help teachers understand, there's a lot of material, there's a lot of content with the high quality resources. Sometimes there's this urge to teach everything, right? Rather than to go deep and isolate the places where you really want to go deep around the mathematics that are tightly connected to the priority standards. And so I think that's coaching and work to support kids, to support educators, so that there's ample time in classrooms for that rich discourse to happen, and for the messiness, the grappling with the mathematics, which I think we've done a disservice to teachers by saying just like, be on this page on this day. That we've got to help them understand and unpack how to get through the content in a way that students are going to learn it more deeply than just at, a surface level.
Certainly. Lindsey?
Can I piggyback on what was just said? The evidence shows that we need time to develop in students deep conceptual understanding. So why math works, why we're using it, procedural fluency, so that's accuracy, efficiency, and flexibility with numbers. And we also need them to have rich real-world problem-solving experiences, which kind of couple together those first two. And the one that gets forgotten the most often is they need to have a productive disposition. Students need to see that math is useful, that math is empowering, and that they can be math people and successful at it.
Thank you so much. And I'll have time for maybe one last comment. If not, I will wrap us up. Anyone else like to chime in? If not, I'll go ahead and wrap us up. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. From Steve, it's always been a pleasure to work with you on the presentation. All our panelists, Lindsey, also appreciate your perspective as well. Really important to have you all not only to reflect on some of the findings and really shine a light into parents' concerns and some of the things that are top of mind for them, as well as some of initiatives that are promising not only here in Massachusetts, but also across the country. Really important as we talk about what comes next and what can we do to tackle some of the challenges. Thank you again for coming today. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. Want to give it over to Jenny to give the last word.
Thanks so much, Shanti. And Shanti meant that's all the time we have today. We want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. Please keep an eye out for future events like this. The MassINC Polling Group has and continues to put out really meaningful findings on Massachusetts residents, and there will be more polls like this in the future, including another parent education poll coming soon. As a reminder, if you missed any of today's event or want to share it with others, it has been recorded and will be posted on the EdTrust and MassINC Polling Group website. So thank you again to the Barr Foundation for sponsoring this poll, and to our audience, thank you so much for being here with us today. Hope you all have a great day.